Hello. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the way churches organize themselves in our ThED Talk. And we're going to have a little bit of theology and some sociology attached to that. Why do we do what we do? First of all, when we think about the way that churches organize, what's the Bible say? The Bible describes there being elders and pastors and deacons, but the way these words are used in the New Testament changes slightly from church to church that's mentioned. And there's a shocker. There's absolutely no mention of bylaws or constitutions in the Bible whatsoever. So how are we supposed to organize ourselves for the mission that God has given us? There are various models of church government. One of the first questions we can ask is, where does authority come from and how is it delegated? Obviously, God is at the top, but in some churches, uh, the local church makes all the decisions in meetings together. And so there's no in between. The local church is supreme, God and the local church. In some, there's a denomination that comes in between. So we are members of the CBOQ, and that means that we listen as well to the things that the CBOQ says to us in terms of specifics about how we organize ourselves. We've chosen to be part of an association that is a member of the CBOQ. And then, of course, there are churches like the Roman Catholic Church or the Anglican Church that have a hierarchy that they believe um, has an unbroken chain of relationship back to the apostles for its leadership. That's authority. Now, the second thing that we need to realize about this authority is that none of these are commanded in the Bible. Baptists have tended to use the first two. The first model is for churches that are very independent, and the second is for churches that tend to be cooperative with each other. Now, who leads in the local church, which is a little bit different? Who sets the policy and makes the decisions? Again, four models. One, God. God, then the people. And then the people who make decisions, typically in lots of meetings, tell the church council how they wish to be organized, and they hire the pastor and tell the pastor the directions that they think the church should be headed. Second model is God, and then the pastor who is the leader. And the pastor sets the tone and the direction and works through a council or board, and then the people then respond to those decisions. Other churches say no, it is a delegated body from within the church, elected, appointed, whichever. That's the council or board, and they direct the pastor, and then the people respond as well. And finally, there's God, and then there's the hierarchy or the denomination, and then the people. And the pastor or the counselor board don't tend to make a lot of decisions. Again, none of these are commanded in the Bible. Baptists have used all of these, but the last really rarely because we don't tend to be very hierarchical. Interestingly, if you come from one of these models and you don't realize you've entered another model, you may get into conflict because you think the way the church should be organized is one way, and the church you're in is organized another way. I've talked with people at Queensway who come from one of these models, and they wish that the church would operate according to another model, or they haven't even realized necessarily that the model is different from what they're used to. So that can cause conflict. Second thing I'd like to look at briefly is just the way people organize, and we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but people organize in ways um, that fits the way God created us to be. So your very close support group is 4 to 6 people. That could be a committee. 12 to 16 people are the friends you really trust, or a group you can keep really close tabs on, and that might be something like a Bible study group. 40 to 60 people are the people in a larger group of those who you could call friends that you know a fair amount about. Get the next size up, and these are the people you can keep tabs on. And this is where a lot of churches end up getting stuck in size because we feel comfortable with people who we generally know. And so a lot of churches find it very hard to grow beyond 180. Then you get the next size church. Oh, sorry, I should have one here that's, yeah, 3 times the size, 350 to 500. And these are faces you might recognize, but you don't really know the people. And over 500, I should say 500, sorry, is basically strangers that you might recognize. Now, this has a role to play when we come into what a church does and how it organizes. In smaller churches, churches 80 and under, the pastor acts like a chaplain. He visits, takes care of the uh, personal needs of parishioners, but there aren't that many programs and things in the church to worry about, and there's certainly not a lot of administration. You go up the next size, and the pastor's a hero. He's involved in everything, makes decisions in all sorts of areas, helps to initiate all the programs. There aren't enough people to carry out all the programs. Pastors in this area are the hero pastors. The next size up, there's enough volunteers to be able to organize much of what goes on in the church. And so the pastor is more administrative and coordinator. By the time you get to the next size up, the pastor has multiple staff underneath them. And so they're the executive and they work through the other staff. And if you get a church 400, 500 or up, the pastor tends to be a celebrity. There's a senior pastor. You might have an executive pastor that does administration. And people come to that church because of the pastor. And they might spend 70, 80% of their time in preparing messages and in meeting with important people in the community. That's church size. Also, this affects, again, the programs you have. If you've got a little church, you tend to do almost everything together and it feels like family. You tend to get the next size up, and there are certain key groups in the church that are emphasized. It may be the seniors group, it may be the teens group, or whatever, when you have a larger number of those people. When you get up to the next size, you start having some specialized ministries. This can be a very difficult size for a church because people want all the different kinds of ministries are available, but there aren't enough people to sustain them, enough leaders, or even enough members to participate. When you get above 300 to 400 people, the church has programs in multiple areas and they tend to have a lot of involvement in the local community. And when you get up to 400 plus, the church may again specialize, but it's a church that everybody comes to because they know about multi-church or mega church that's in the community. Finally, where does authority tend to lie? And this goes back to our church models again. In the small church, it might be one key leader, the pastor, a council or board member, or it may even be a single member, Grandma Smith, who's been in the church for 85 years, and what she says goes. When you get the next size up, churches tend to look at their bylaws and their policies, and the congregation tends to vote a lot on things. So you get the congregation voting, and as you get the next size up, you move from the congregational voting to bylaws and policies. When a church gets a little bit bigger again, then there's an executive model, and boards tend to take over a lot of leadership and say, this is what we're doing, because you can't hold multiple meetings of everybody. And fascinatingly, the older you are, the more you tend to like the congregational model, and the younger you are, the more you tend to like the executive model because it seems to be efficient. So that's as far as we're going to go today, but we need to think about that when we look at Queensway, the size that it was, the size that it is, and how it organizes itself. God bless.